A year and a half ago, I bought an Xbox Series S, and I've been quite happy with it in a lot of ways, while being somewhat disappointed in others. Fast forward to today, and I think it's important to go over a few things that just isn't mentioned when it comes to purchasing a Series S. As I mentioned, I bought my Xbox Series S a year and a half ago as kind of an entry point into next-gen consoles. And I was immediately blown away by the speed of the SSD, how nice it was to quick resume between games, as well as just being able to play a lot of games on Game Pass. Not that that's necessarily exclusive to next-gen, but coming from a PS4, there was a lot to like. Now, fast forward to today, and I recently purchased a Series X. And its main purpose is to more or less replace my Series S as my Xbox console. And the reason why is taking the Switch out of the equation, I just don't play my Series S that often. Between my PS5 and Series S, I probably play the PS5 at least like 80-85% of the time. And it kind of boils down to three main reasons why I don't play my Series S. A small reason would be the controllers. Now, I like both controllers, but if a game's offered on both, I will lean towards using the DualSense with its extra adaptive triggers and haptic feedback. It is a plus. Now that's a small reason, it's not a huge reason. Kind of a medium-sized reason is storage. The Series S's storage is terrible. It's laughable. 364 gigs is not a whole lot to carry a whole lot of games. You compare that to the PS5 and Series X, and it's not a lot. Not that those consoles are really doing too great there either. 805 and 667 gigs-ish is not a lot to work with modern games. But the difference maker here is on how much it costs to get extra storage. Now on Xbox, to get expansion, you have to spend almost as much, if not more, than the console itself. Comparing this to PlayStation, you have to spend a lot of money to get at least a decent amount of storage. Not that the PlayStation option's cheap, but it's definitely cheaper. I spent about $230 on a 2TB edition, and so that kind of puts my total around 2.6 terabytes of usable space. Now comparing that to the Series S, to have 2 terabytes you have to spend like $400, which is quite steep considering the console itself is only $300. Now that's somewhat of a temporary problem. We'll have to see where this thing's head for the rest of this generation, but it's definitely not an incentivizing reason to want to put games on my Xbox. Now the third reason and the biggest reason is visuals. And when I say visuals, I don't just mean is it 4K or is it not 4K? That's kind of where I feel like a lot of people are kind of glossing over the surface here when it comes to the difference between the Series S and the Series X. Visuals have always been overstated. So what I mean by that is, when we entered in the 3D generation, games looked terrible. I mean, they honestly did not look better than the 2D games before it because it was 3D for the first time. But even fast forwarding just a bit, you have the 360 and PS3 where games were just HD, but they weren't really like HD. They were just technically HD. And that's kind of always happened. It wasn't until the following generation that games actually started to look high definition. And so when the PS4 Pro came out and I had a chance to try it out, I wasn't really that impressed. I thought the visuals looked a little bit better over the base PS4, but not enough of a difference where you feel like you're missing out on much. And so that's one reason why I wasn't really impressed by the buzzwords used around these next-gen systems, and so I thought I'd be more okay with getting a Series S because 4K to me didn't really seem like a reality. Now, after owning a PS5 and playing Astro's Playroom, I actually have changed my thoughts on that. We have reached 4K. Now, 4K and 60 at the same time, not so much, but the idea of native 4K is actually plausible at this time. And on the Series S, you're not getting anywhere close to that. You're getting a 1080p 60 console. And so that kind of takes me to, is this console next gen? Technically it is, and if you're talking from a just features point of view, it's actually more next gen in a lot of ways than a PS5. Has a comparably fast storage option. At launch you had a lot of nice features like VRR, 1440p support, which really makes the console feel next gen, and the main thing is quick resume. Now when it comes to the actual games running on your PS5 and Series S, PlayStation actually feels like it has the next gen offerings. And it kind of comes down to the actual visuals as well as the controller. You mix those two things together and you feel like you're playing something new, versus on the Series S, I often just felt like I was playing a higher frame rate version of a PS4 game. And so I never really noticed a big difference. It just felt like there was some advantages, but it more or less was the same thing. And so it almost feels like the Series S is kind of a half step in generation. And I know a lot of people will be upset by that because it's, in a lot of ways it's not. It can play all the newest games, so it's not technically a last gen system, but it kind of feels like it when you're playing games. And to a lot of people this doesn't really matter, but to me, capturing footage for my channel as well as just playing the game, it's like, why would I play a game on Series S if it's available on the PS5? And so between those three reasons, the controller, the lack of storage, and the actual visuals themselves, I want to play games on my PS5 over my Series S. And so it kind of makes me feel like I've wasted money on the Series S and that I'm just not using it. The Series X looks way better than the Series S. When people talk about visuals, they don't understand there's more to visuals than just resolution. If you plug in a Series X into a 1080p TV, it's going to look better most of the time over the Series S. Now, Microsoft's done a really good job of optimizing their games to look good on both, and when you're playing a game like Forza Horizon 5, that game looks fantastic on both. Like, you feel like you're getting a next-gen experience on the Series S. And so Microsoft does a good job of consistency. Where this falls apart a bit, though, is with third-party games. A good recent example is Hogwarts Legacy. That game looks pretty good on PS5, but it looks not nearly as good on Series S. It's not horrible, but in comparison, there really shouldn't be that big of a gap. The Series S version looks quite a bit muddier at sub 1080p resolution, at least that's what it looks like to me. All that for still not stable frame rates and slower load times. You see loading screens a lot more often in that game on Series S over PS5 and even the Series X. And so, is that the Series S's fault? Not necessarily. A lot of it's probably the developers not doing a good enough job of optimizing it on that hardware. But to the consumer, it is what it is. And so that's going to be the experience you're going to experience when you own a Series S. And so that's just something to keep in mind when you're comparing the Series S to the Series X. With the extra horsepower of the Series X over the Series S, you can see visual differences again besides the resolution. You can see better implementation of ray tracing, you can often see more foliage. Everything is a little bit better on the Series X, and so everything looks a little bit better on the Series X, even if you're going for that lower resolution. And when it comes to things like frame rate, the Series S 1080p 120 is not really something I've ever seen actually done in reality. Now the Series X, if you want to do 1080p at 120 frames, is a lot more of a viable option. And so again, when it comes to visuals, beyond just the resolution, having the more capable machine is a better option. Now, if you're using your Series S as a Game Pass machine, specifically mostly for first-party titles, it may not matter as much. But what I'm getting to here is that I just don't play on my Series S nearly as much as I would like. Yeah, that's only $300, but for $300 I've barely touched it since I've owned a PS5. I don't necessarily regret buying a Series S. It's in fact become my bedroom console hooked up to my TV there, where my main console is the Series X in the living room. But with the Series S, I do feel like I didn't properly do a good enough job of thinking of all the factors on what matters to me as a gamer. I don't think the Series S is bad, I just don't think it's for everybody, and I think it's important to realize if it's for you or not, because it is for a lot of people, but it's also not for a lot of people. If you're coming from an Xbox One, then maybe you could go either way. If you're coming from a Switch and you just want a secondary console, then sure. If you have a PS5 and you just want a Series S to only play Xbox games and you prefer your PlayStation every other situation, then those are all situations where I could see the Series S being good in your scenario. Now, if you're coming from a 1X, you might notice the difference because Series S games tend to run the Xbox One S version of those games just at a higher frame rate versus the Series X, which runs the Xbox One X version of it. And so you're gonna see a difference right away in resolution, because more or less what you're doing is you're trading off that resolution for frame rate. And to me, if you're going from one console generation to the next, it doesn't sound the most appealing to have to compromise for something that's a lesser version of in some ways. And so I think if you're any sort of hardcore gamer where the Xbox is your main console, or if you want to play the best version of every game right now, or if you have a large backlog of previous Xbox physical media, or if you have an Xbox One X, those are all situations where I don't think you'll probably want to get a Series S. Now, if you're on the fence, I would just say just get the Series X. I don't think you'll regret it. If I'm wrong, let me know. I'd love to hear what you have as your setup down below. Do you use mostly PlayStation? Do you have multiple consoles? Do you use PC? Do you mix it in with your Switch? How do you have it set up? Again, I might be just kind of weird in that if I'm spending $500 or even $300 on a console, I like to spend at least a good amount of time playing on that console. And so even if it's not a 50-50 split, I want to spend time on both. But again, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are down below. Please leave me a like before you go. And as always, I appreciate you for watching, and until next time, see ya.